1. Your ears will take you further than your mouth ever could. You don't grow by hearing yourself talk. You grow when you open your ears and close your ego. Listening is where wisdom begins. Too many people are trying to be impressive, talking loud, saying nothing. But the ones who rise, the ones who last, they're the ones who listen. They soak in truth. They observe the room. They learn the rhythm before they make a move. Your mouth might get you in the door, but your ears, your humility will keep you in the room. 2. Silence is strength in a world addicted to noise. Everybody's shouting, everybody wants to be heard, but the loudest person is rarely the wisest. Real power doesn't need to prove itself. It listens, it studies, it understands. When you learn to be still, when you learn to pause, you find clarity in the chaos. Silence is not weakness, it's strategy. It's the calm before the breakthrough. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. 3. The more you listen, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more you lead. You want to lead? Learn to listen. The greatest leaders are the greatest listeners. They don't just wait for their turn to talk, they lean in, they absorb. They don't just hear, they understand. Because when you understand people, you can move people. Listening is a form of respect, and respect opens doors that talent and charm never will. The student who listens today becomes the teacher who transforms tomorrow. 4. You don't have to speak to make an impact. Let your presence, your focus, and your discipline speak for you. Sometimes, your discipline speaks louder than your voice. Your work ethic, your consistency, your ability to stay grounded when others are busy making noise, that's what makes people pay attention. Talking doesn't build legacy, action does. Character does. Listening isn't passive, it's preparation. It's how you sharpen your edge while others dull theirs with distractions. You don't always need the mic to make a statement. Let your life speak. 1. Silence is strength in a world addicted to noise. In a culture driven by speed, performance, and instant validation, silence can seem like surrender. But real strength isn't always loud. It's often quiet, controlled, and deeply rooted. While the world screams for attention, the truly powerful remain composed. While others chase applause, the disciplined stay anchored in purpose. There is an undeniable strength in the one who doesn't need to speak to prove their worth, the one who chooses stillness over spectacle. In silence, character is built. In stillness, power is refined. And in a world addicted to noise, the quiet ones carry the greatest weight. We are conditioned to respond, conditioned to fill every space with sound, conditioned to jump into every conversation, react to every post, defend every opinion. But noise doesn't equal clarity. Talking doesn't equal progress, and volume doesn't equal value. The most confident people you'll meet are the ones who aren't afraid of silence. They've mastered the ability to sit in a moment, unbothered by pressure, unshaken by the chaos around them. That's not apathy, that's awareness. That's not weakness, that's control. It's the control to not be baited into battles that don't matter, the control to observe before moving, the control to respond with wisdom instead of reacting with impulse. The ones who can be silent are the ones who have nothing to prove. They don't need validation because they've already done the internal work. They don't panic in quiet spaces because they've learned that silence is not a void, it's a vessel, a place where insight grows, where direction becomes clearer, where vision sharpens. When you stop trying to speak over every situation, you begin to hear the deeper truth behind it. You start recognizing patterns, understanding motives, seeing through confusion. But you can only do that if you stop feeding the addiction to constant stimulation and start trusting the strength of silence. The truth is, silence doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. It doesn't make you timid, it makes you tactical. There is nothing soft about being strategic. In fact, it takes more discipline to hold your peace than to throw your opinion. It takes more maturity to pause than to pounce. And that pause, that space between what happened and how you respond, that's where the strongest people live. That's where the growth happens. That's where emotional intelligence is built. If you can't sit with silence, you'll always depend on noise to make you feel secure. You'll start mistaking distraction for direction. You'll rely on other people's opinions to make your decisions. But when you embrace silence, you no longer need external noise to validate internal strength. You become your own compass. You become clear, calm, and calculated. You start to realize that not everything requires a comment. Not every attack deserves a reply. Not every argument deserves your energy. And not every opportunity requires immediate action. Silence gives you room to choose wisely. People who operate from silence don't rush to be seen because they know real value isn't built in the spotlight, it's built in solitude. It's easy to perform for a crowd, but it's in the quiet where your intentions are purified. It's in the quiet where your motives are tested. It's in the quiet where your resilience is formed. You can't fake discipline when no one's watching. You can't fake preparation in private. You either have it or you don't. And the ones who learn to embrace the silence are the ones who emerge with unshakable strength. Not because they were loud, but because they were locked in. Silence also teaches you how to listen not just to others, but to yourself. In the noise, we drown out our instincts. We get pulled in 100 directions. But in silence, your soul speaks. Your conscience gets clearer. You start to notice what energizes you and what drains you. You start hearing your own thoughts, unfiltered by the crowd. You begin to understand who you are without the mask, without the pressure, without the performance. And that kind of self-awareness is a power that can't be shaken. When you train yourself to be silent, you develop restraint. You stop oversharing. You stop broadcasting your every move. You learn to move in silence, and not because you're hiding, but because you're focused. There's a sacredness to your vision, a purpose that's too important to be exposed to unnecessary opinions. Not everyone needs to know your next step. Not every thought needs to be voiced. You learn to value privacy, not secrecy, but sacredness. Because you understand that some things grow best when they're protected from premature exposure. We often confuse noise with momentum. Just because someone is loud doesn't mean they're leading. Just because a room is busy doesn't mean it's productive. Just because your schedule is packed doesn't mean your purpose is being fulfilled. Silence allows you to discern the difference between movement and progress. It forces you to face the reality of your direction. Are you busy because you're growing, or are you busy because you're avoiding? Silence confronts the truth. It strips away the excuses, and it demands clarity. In leadership, silence is one of the greatest tools. The best leaders know when to speak and when to wait. They don't rush decisions. They don't panic in uncertainty. They know how to sit in tension until the right move becomes clear. That kind of patience is what builds lasting influence. Because people don't follow panic, they follow peace. They follow the one who can remain calm when everything else is chaotic. And that calm isn't something you manufacture in the moment, it's something you cultivate in silence. In relationships, silence can be a gift. Not the kind of silence that avoids or punishes, but the kind that listens, observes, and learns. Talking is easy. Listening takes effort. And silence the space between the words is where trust is built. When you truly listen to someone, without interrupting, without rehearsing your reply, without turning the conversation back to yourself, you create safety. And safety builds intimacy. You don't have to solve everything with words. Sometimes just being present, fully present, without needing to fix or explain, is the most powerful thing you can offer. In conflict, silence is your armor. It protects you from saying things you can't take back. It gives you time to feel without reacting. It creates space for reason to return. Emotion is a terrible driver. But silence gives emotion time to settle so that logic can steer again. Not everything deserves an immediate reply. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is pause, breathe, and let the moment pass. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. Even in your personal growth, silence is essential. Growth doesn't happen in the echo chamber of constant affirmation. It happens in the quiet corners of self-reflection. It's in the silence where you confront your patterns, where you hold up the mirror and ask the hard questions, where you admit what's not working and commit to what needs to change. There's no crowd in that space. No cheering section, just you and the truth. And truth, when embraced in silence, becomes transformation. Silence also builds anticipation. When you don't always speak, when you don't always react, when you don't always reveal, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. Because people can't manipulate what they can't predict. They can't control what they can't read. Your silence becomes your shield. Your stillness becomes your strategy. You move with intention instead of impulse. You communicate less but say more. You speak rarely, but when you do, people listen. There's a dignity in silence, a quiet confidence. The world may mistake it for passivity, but in reality, it's preparation. You're not doing nothing, you're doing the internal work. You're observing, learning, sharpening. And when the time is right, you'll move not with noise, but with precision, not with performance, but with purpose. You won't need to convince anyone, because your presence will confirm everything they need to know. You won't need to announce your impact. Your consistency will reveal it. Don't underestimate the power of silence in a noisy world. While everyone else is busy trying to be seen, be the one who's watching. While they're talking, be the one who's understanding. While they're reacting, be the one who's waiting. And while they're burning out, be the one who's building up. Your silence is not a sign that you've lost your voice, it's a sign that you've found your focus. There's a time for everything, a time to speak and a time to be silent, but only the strong know when to be which. Only the wise understand the rhythm of restraint. And only the focused realize that silence is not empty, it's full of answers, full of insight, full of power. The strength you've been looking for isn't in the next outburst, it's in the next pause. It's in the next moment where you choose clarity over chaos, peace over pride, purpose over performance. And in that moment, you won't need anyone to see it, because you'll know it. And that knowing, that internal, unshakable clarity is strength. 2, your ears will take you further than your mouth ever could. We live in a world where talking has become the new talent, where noise is mistaken for influence, and volume is often confused with value. But there's a principle that time continues to prove true: what you absorb will always outweigh what you announce. The ones who rise through adversity, who break through limits, who walk into rooms and shift atmospheres, they're not always the loudest, but they are always the most aware. And awareness doesn't come from speaking, it comes from listening. There is a deep power in restraint, in patience, in the ability to remain quiet long enough to truly understand what's going on around you. You'll never hear what life is trying to teach you if you're too busy trying to prove what you already know. The world celebrates charisma, but character is developed in the quiet. It's not about having the quickest response or the slickest soundbite. It's about having the wisdom to know when silence speaks louder than any sentence. In fact, sometimes your greatest strength won't be in your ability to articulate, but in your willingness to absorb. Listening doesn't just give you knowledge, it gives you leverage. It allows you to see what others miss, to understand what others ignore, to recognize what others rush past. The ones who change the game are the ones who study it in silence before they ever play. They don't rush into the spotlight, they prepare in the shadows. They don't blurt out their dreams, they listen for the strategy. Listening is a discipline. It's not just about hearing sounds. It's about filtering through the noise to catch the signal. And the signal, the lesson, the opportunity, the direction is always there. But it can't be discovered by those who never pause to receive it. Think about every moment you missed because you were too focused on speaking instead of understanding. How many connections weren't made, how many breakthroughs delayed, how many lessons overlooked, not because they weren't present, but because you weren't present enough to listen. Listening is about presence. It's about being so rooted in the moment that you're not worried about what you'll say next, but fully tuned into what's being revealed right now. It's about humility, because it takes humility to stop trying to impress and start trying to improve. The truth is, many people would rather look smart than become wise. But the wise never stop learning, and learning requires listening. You don't need to be the first to speak to be effective. You don't need to fill every silence with sound. Silence is not awkward, it's powerful. It's in the silence that thoughts settle, that insights surface, that true communication begins. Some people are just waiting for their turn to talk, but not every conversation is an audition. Some moments require you to be a student, not a star. And if you're always performing, you're rarely progressing. You don't need the spotlight to be significant. You don't need to dominate the dialogue to develop your destiny. Sometimes your best move is to stay still, study the room, and listen. Because when you listen, you learn. And when you learn, you lead. Not from a place of arrogance, but from a place of awareness. And awareness is the foundation of all lasting achievement. This principle applies to every area of life: relationships, leadership, business, growth. In your relationships, listening is love. It's saying, I value you enough to stop talking about me. In leadership, listening is leverage. It gives you insights that your competitors miss. In business, listening is innovation. It allows you to hear problems before they become crises. And in growth, listening is the gateway. You can't grow from what you don't understand, and you can't understand what you refuse to hear. The problem is, too many people confuse talking with teaching. They think that if they say more, they're contributing more. But the truth is, some of the most valuable contributions come from silent reflection, not constant narration. Speaking without listening is like running without direction. It might feel productive, but you're not going anywhere that matters. You're just moving. Progress requires purpose, and purpose requires perception. Perception only comes through intentional listening. It's not enough to just hear the words being said. You have to catch the meaning, the intention, the pattern. Real listeners aren't waiting for their turn to talk. They're waiting for their turn to understand. They're tuned in. They're focused. And because of that, they can move with clarity while everyone else is distracted by noise. Listening sharpens your instincts. It builds your internal compass. It develops your discernment. And discernment is more valuable than raw talent, because while talent may open a door, discernment tells you which door to walk through and which ones to close behind you. You'll notice something about those who truly move with purpose. They're slow to speak and quick to learn. They don't interrupt, they interpret. They're not always seen, but they're always studying. And because of that, they don't waste energy reacting to everything. They respond strategically to the right things. Listening builds patience, and patience builds power. There's a difference between reacting emotionally and responding intentionally. Only listeners know the difference. Don't just listen to people, listen to life. Life is always speaking. It's speaking through your experiences, your setbacks, your seasons. But if you're constantly trying to talk your way through every situation, you'll miss what the situation is trying to teach you. You'll miss the subtle signs, the hidden keys, the quiet warnings. Listening allows you to catch the shift before it becomes a storm. It allows you to adjust before the opportunity is lost. And it helps you hear not just what's being said, but what's not being said. And that awareness can be the difference between progress and pain. Sometimes the answer you're looking for is already in the room. You just haven't listened long enough to find it. The solution is in the silence. The growth is in the gaps. But the only way to access it is through focus and humility. When you listen, you stop trying to be right and start trying to be real. You stop trying to dominate and start trying to develop. Listening is a mirror. It shows you where you need to change. It reflects your blind spots. It corrects your assumptions. And if you're courageous enough to truly listen, it will elevate you beyond what your own voice could ever accomplish. There's a time to speak, but there's a time to study. And you can't do both at the same time. Sometimes your best strategy is to sit back, close your mouth, and open your mind. Because the moment you start listening, you start leveling up. You pick up things others miss. You start seeing the truth behind the tone, the motive behind the movement. You become sharper, calmer, more prepared. And that preparation is what separates amateurs from professionals. Those who last from those who just get lucky. You can only make wise decisions when you have the right data, and listening gives you the data. Talking too early blinds you. It drowns out the clues. You end up acting on assumption instead of insight. And that's why so many people keep running in circles, because they're not learning. They're just looping. But the moment you slow down and listen, the pattern breaks. The breakthrough begins. And suddenly, you're not reacting, you're operating. People who listen are rare, but they are remembered. Because when someone truly listens to you, you feel seen, you feel respected, you feel valued. Listening creates connection. It creates trust. And trust is the currency of influence. If you want to lead, if you want to make an impact, you have to earn that trust. And it starts with listening, not with pretending, not with nodding while thinking about your next point, but with intentional presence, with genuine care, with focused attention. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more listeners, more people who are willing to be students, even after they've become successful. More people who realize that wisdom isn't proven by how much you say, but by how much you understand. Understanding comes from listening, and listening starts when pride ends. So many people sabotage their own growth because they think listening is weakness. But the opposite is true. Listening is mastery. It's how the elite separate themselves from the average. It's how the prepared outlast the proud. Because eventually the noise dies down, the crowd moves on, and the only thing that lasts is who you've become in the process. And becoming requires listening. If you really want to go further in life, stop trying to be the loudest person in the room. Stop needing to have the last word. Stop interrupting wisdom with your insecurity. Lean in, be quiet. Be present, learn, grow, and let your ears take you to places your mouth never could. 3. Control the volume to command the room. There's a difference between being heard and being understood. And there's a greater difference between making noise and making impact. In a world full of raised voices and constant commentary, those who can control their volume internally and externally are the ones who command the room. They don't beg for attention, they carry presence. They don't dominate with force, they influence with calm. They don't rush to speak, because they've trained themselves to listen, observe, and then move with precision. This isn't about silence for silence's sake. It's about strategic restraint. It's about realizing that your power doesn't increase when you talk Marit, increases when you talk right. Volume without vision is just noise. You can have the loudest voice in the room and still say nothing of substance. You can be the most visible and still be the least valuable. When you're addicted to speaking just to be seen, you miss the opportunity to observe and truly assess what's happening. Control is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's knowing that the right word, spoken at the right time, carries more weight than 1,000 rushed sentences. It's knowing that your voice matters more when it's backed by clarity, not chaos. People who command the room aren't frantic. They're not bouncing from one opinion to the next, trying to win everyone's approval. They're steady. They walk in with quiet authority, because they've already done the internal work. They're not reacting, they're reading. They're not yelling, they're analyzing. And when they speak, it shifts the atmosphere not because of volume, but because of substance. Because when you've trained yourself to listen first, everything you say after that is intentional. This applies to every space you enter: corporate meetings, creative brainstorming sessions, one-on-one conversations, family gatherings, negotiations. You don't need to speak first to lead. In fact, leaders who rush to speak often miss the nuance. They miss the emotional temperature of the room. They miss the unspoken cues. But when you walk in with calm curiosity and listen longer than others talk, you begin to see what's really happening beneath the surface. And once you see it, you can speak directly to it. That's how influence is built, not by shouting, but by showing understanding, not by overpowering, but by outlasting. Control isn't about suppressing your voice, it's about stewarding it, using it like a scalpel, not a hammer, knowing that timing matters just as much as content. That delivery is part of the message. When you walk into a room already needing to be heard, you lose your leverage. But when you walk into a room needing to learn, you gain insight. And insight is power. Because it lets you speak to what others ignore. It lets you solve problems before they explode. It lets you anticipate the next move, while everyone else is still reacting to the last one. The disciplined communicator is dangerous, not because they say a lot, but because they say just enough. Their words are chosen, their tone is measured, their message is clear. And that clarity cuts through the fog of confusion that often fills rooms full of egos, insecurities, and noise. People are drawn to voices that bring order. They're drawn to people who can simplify complexity without oversimplifying truth. And that skill starts with listening, with observation, with volume control. The world we live in rewards quick takes, fast replies, hot opinions. But real power lies in the pause to think, the pause to weigh, the pause to edit. Because not every thought deserves to be spoken. Not every emotion deserves a microphone. Not every moment is the right moment to respond. Sometimes your silence will say more than your speech ever could. Especially when it's clear you're holding something back, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You can't control the room if you can't control yourself. That includes your tone, your timing, and your temperament. Emotional discipline isn't a lack of passion, it's a refinement of it. It means you know when to dial up and when to dial down. It means you understand the difference between assertiveness and aggression. You don't need to prove your point with force when you've already established it with presence. And presence isn't about being loud, it's about being rooted. It's about walking in such alignment with your values that people lean in when you speak, not because you're louder, but because you're grounded. You've probably experienced moments where someone said something in a whisper, and yet it cut deeper than a scream. That's the power of controlled volume. When words are chosen with care, when they come from a place of conviction rather than insecurity, they don't need amplification. Truth doesn't need to be shouted, it needs to be embodied. People will remember how you made them feel more than they'll remember what you said. And when your tone carries stability, people feel safe enough to listen. But this level of communication doesn't happen by accident. It requires intention. It requires self-awareness. It requires you to be in tune not just with your words, but with your presence. How are you showing up in the room? Are you the one who dominates the energy and leaves others feeling small? Or are you the one who elevates the room by being fully present, deeply aware, and quick to listen? That's the kind of presence that lingers. That's the kind of influence that lasts. People who control their volume aren't muted, they're masterful. They've learned the art of subtlety, the weight of brevity, the strength of restraint. And they know that sometimes the most commanding statement you can make is to say nothing at all until the time is right, until the words are ripe, until the impact is inevitable. That's when the room listens. Not because you demanded it, but because you earned it. And when you start showing up this way, when you walk into rooms not to speak first, but to understand best, you'll notice a shift. People will start deferring to you, not because you're loud, but because you're wise. They'll trust your judgment, they'll seek your input. Not because you talk the most, but because when you do speak, it lands, it resonates, it sticks. This doesn't just apply to boardrooms or stages, it applies to relationships. In a conversation with someone you care about, controlling your volume can mean the difference between healing and hurting. A calm tone can de-escalate tension. A quiet voice can invite vulnerability. When emotions are high, volume is a weapon. But when you discipline your voice, you create a safe space. And in that space, real connection can grow. In times of conflict, the loudest one is usually the least in control. But the one who keeps their tone steady, who speaks with intention and listens with openness, always holds the upper hand. Because while others are reacting from emotion, you're operating from clarity. While they're trying to win the argument, you're trying to win the relationship. And that shift in motive changes everything. You don't need to match someone's volume to prove your strength. You don't need to meet their energy to assert your position. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is remain calm while others lose their composure. Because that calm is not weakness, it's command, it's confidence. And it speaks volumes without ever raising your voice. People who control their volume also control their environments. They walk into chaotic spaces and bring order. They enter tense conversations and bring balance, not by being passive, but by being anchored. They know how to read the moment, how to match the energy without being overtaken by it, how to assert themselves without overpowering others. That kind of leadership is rare, but it's magnetic. Because everyone's looking for someone who doesn't just talk louder, but someone who speaks clearer. And it all starts with the discipline to turn the internal volume down, to not let your insecurities drive your speech, to not let your fear speak before your faith, to not let pressure override your principles. When your inner world is loud, your outer words will reflect that chaos. But when your inner world is quiet, still, aligned, rooted, your words will carry weight. They'll be less frequent, but more impactful, less reactive, but more revelatory. Because you won't just be talking, you'll be transforming. So start practicing volume control, not just with your mouth, but with your mind, with your emotions, with your presence. Learn to pause before you speak. Learn to question your impulse to jump into every conversation. Learn to listen not just for what's being said, but for what's behind it. Learn to recognize when silence is more powerful than speech. And then, when the moment calls for it, speak. But not from insecurity, not from ego. Speak from clarity, speak from peace, speak from purpose. Because the one who controls the volume controls the room, not through force, not through fear, but through the quiet, consistent discipline of listening more than they speak and speaking only when it counts.